It was just a small accident, the kind that happens when you're lost in your routine. I was tidying up, humming to myself, when my elbow nudged Ethan's gym bag off the bench. It hit the floor with a dull thud, nothing dramatic. But then I heard it. A buzz. Then another. My first thought? His phone. But I'd just seen it charging in the kitchen. I bent down, pulled at the zipper, and that's when I saw it. Nestled under a pair of sweatpants was a phone I'd never seen before. No case, no stickers, just bare. I picked it up, half expecting it to be dead, but the screen lit up and what I saw didn't punch me in the gut. Not yet, anyway. The lock screen showed a string of messages, all from someone named B. It wasn't just casual. These were daily, recent, needy. I didn't feel heat rising in my face. I felt cold, focused. I didn't scream, didn't throw it, didn't even frown. Instead, I sat down on the edge of the bed, stared at that glowing screen, and took a deep breath. No passcode. Of course there wasn't. He'd hidden it, but never expected anyone to find it. Or maybe he thought I'd never question him. Either way, I opened the messages. And you know what? I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because, in that moment, I knew the game had just changed. The first message was innocent enough. Can't wait to see you again. But the ones that followed painted a whole story. Nicknames. Inside jokes. Little routines only lovers build. My fingers scrolled while my heart took notes. She called him E, sent selfies in places I didn't recognize, restaurants we'd never been to, a hotel lobby, the corner of a bed that wasn't ours. It was all there, plain as day. A second life, perfectly compartmentalized. Or so he thought. I could have lost it, could have screamed his name and shattered the calm. But instead, I sat with it. Let the betrayal settle into my bones. My silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. I knew this wasn't the moment to confront, it was the moment to observe. Every message I read, every timestamp I noticed, became another piece of the puzzle. The longer I sat there, the more power I felt returning to my body. Not rage, not despair, control. It's strange how clarity can arrive in the messiest moments. There I was, alone in our bedroom, holding the evidence of his lies in my hand, and all I could think was, he has no idea what he just gave me. This wasn't just a second phone. It was a door, a key, a confession he didn't even know he'd made. He thought he had two lives. He didn't know one of them now belonged to me. I tucked the phone back where I found it, careful not to disturb a single fold. The last thing I wanted was to tip him off before I was ready. Timing was everything now. I went back to folding his laundry like nothing had happened, the weight of the discovery sitting quietly beneath my ribs. He walked in 10 minutes later, kissed my cheek like always, and asked what was for dinner. I smiled. Just smiled. That night, I watched him sleep. Peaceful. Oblivious. It's amazing how someone can betray you and still snore without a care in the world. I lay there, eyes wide open, while the glow of his second life flickered in my thoughts. But I wasn't drowning in sadness. I wasn't curled up in a ball like the women in every story we hear. No, I was wide awake, writing a new one, my version. You see, something changed in me that day. The woman who cried over little things, who apologized for asking too many questions. She vanished. In her place stood someone sharper, colder, quieter. And he'd never noticed the shift until it was far too late. Because I wasn't planning to leave. Not yet. I was planning something else. The next morning, while he showered, I unlocked the second phone like it was mine, because by then, it felt like it was. I read her latest message. Last night was torture without you. I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering. Then I started typing. Nothing too clever, just enough to sound like him. A short reply, a wink emoji, something he would have sent without thinking twice. And just like that, I became him. It was easier than I expected. He didn't use punctuation. His messages were short, often lazy, always predictable. She responded right away, hard eyes and more longing. She had no idea. I could feel her slipping deeper into the lie with every word I sent. I wasn't trying to save the marriage anymore. I wasn't even trying to understand why. I was building something else, something slow, something that would hurt when it landed. Each message became a thread in my plan. I started saving everything: screenshots, voice notes, the locations of their little hideaways. I wasn't in a rush. I let her talk, let her gush, let her think he was still choosing her. The longer she believed it, the more complete my evidence became, and the stronger I felt. Not broken, not bitter. Just ready. I started to notice patterns. They always met on Thursdays. She hated when he didn't text, "Good morning." She thought they had secrets no one could ever untangle. But I was untangling them, one thread at a time. I started to ask questions, pretending to be curious, pretending to care. "What was your favorite time together?" I'd type, and she'd answer in paragraphs, painting the full picture I hadn't asked for, but needed. Their history was longer than I expected. 2 years. I traced their first meeting back to a conference I remember Ethan coming home tired from. Now I know why. Every late meeting, every "I forgot to call," suddenly made sense. And strangely, I didn't feel devastated. I felt confirmed. Every doubt I'd swallowed over the years had a timestamp now. Every gut feeling had a screenshot. But I never let myself get sloppy. I stayed in character, even when her words made my skin crawl. I laughed when she said he made her feel safe. I replied sweetly when she hinted at love, because none of it mattered. Not the fantasy she thought she was living, not the affection she thought was real. What mattered was that she kept talking and I kept listening. And every message was another nail, gently tapped into place. By the end of the week, I had enough to ruin them both. Photos of their hotel stays, recordings of her whispering things she'd never say if she knew I was listening. I even saved a voice note where she moaned his name. It made my stomach turn, but I didn't delete it. Every file, every word, I backed up to a folder labeled Truth. I wasn't collecting revenge. I was building a reckoning. What shocked me most wasn't the affair. It was how easy it was to steal his voice, how predictable he'd become, how hollow their connection really was. She never once noticed the difference, never once asked, "Are you okay?" or "You sound different." Just constant need, constant fantasy. And I fed it all, spoon by spoon, because I wasn't trying to catch him in a lie. I was shaping the lie myself. And when she mentioned their next meeting, "Same place next Thursday?" I didn't hesitate. I wrote back, "Something better, trust me." That was the moment I stopped pretending. I wasn't answering as Ethan anymore. I was writing the ending, and neither of them had a clue who held the pen now. The idea came to me in the quietest moment, while pouring wine into a clean glass and staring at our dining table. 6 seats. Perfect. I knew exactly how to do it. Not with screaming or scenes. With stillness. With planning. I invited his parents, a few friends, said I wanted to celebrate our anniversary, something small, intimate. Ethan was touched, or maybe just relieved I wasn't suspicious. Either way, he smiled. I didn't. The second invite went out right after. I used his words, his tone. "Come by the house. I've got something special planned. Don't knock. Just come straight in." She replied with a heart. I wondered if she wore perfume for him. If she'd bring wine? The same wine I was chilling for the dinner table. I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered the voice notes, the hotel selfies, the lies she helped him tell. The day before, I cleaned the house like it was sacred ground, every inch. Then I set the table. White candles, the good plates, folded napkins. Everything looked perfect. On the living room TV, I cued the folder. Every screenshot, every audio, every photo. I added a title slide, "Typed by your loving wife," and I smiled. Not because it was done, but because it was only beginning. Ethan was unusually sweet that day, brought home flowers, lilies my favorite, asked if I wanted to go out instead. I told him no, tonight was special. He looked relieved again. Maybe he thought we were finally healing, moving forward. I almost laughed. I kissed his cheek and told him he'd love what I had planned. And he said, "I'm just glad we're okay." I nodded. We were far from okay, but I was more than glad. As the sun started to set, I lit the candles one by one, the dining room filled with soft light like something out of a movie. Everything was warm and golden, deceptive, comforting. He opened wine while I adjusted the TV volume, making sure the first slide was ready to play. He still didn't notice the HDMI cable running from the laptop. Still didn't notice the second phone was gone. I'd hidden it well. Guests started arriving right on time. His sister, his best friend, his parents. Laughter filled the air. Toasts, hugs, everything so normal it was almost absurd. Ethan was glowing, pouring wine, telling stories, holding my hand under the table like he meant it. But I kept glancing at the clock, counting down. She was coming. And when she walked through that door, everything would split in two. The last toast had just been made when I heard the gate click. No knock, just the soft sound of the front door opening. My pulse didn't race. I stayed seated, wine in hand, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. Ethan froze for half a second, barely noticeable to anyone but me. Then he stood, confused. Maybe he thought it was a neighbor, or maybe some part of him already knew. She stepped into the room wearing red. I'll never forget that. Her eyes scanned the table, the candles, the faces, me. Her smile faltered. Ethan turned, and for a split second, everything hung in the air. The silence was heavy, almost beautiful. No one moved. No one spoke. And then I picked up the remote and pressed play. The TV lit up. First the folder title, then the messages. One by one, their affair spilled out across the screen, line by line, photos, audio, texts ending with, "Typed by your loving wife." Her mouth dropped open. Ethan's glass slipped from his hand, and I just kept watching, like it was someone else's story. But it wasn't. It was mine, and it wasn't over yet. I think what surprised me most was how quiet it was. No one screamed. No one shouted. Just a room full of people holding their breath while betrayal danced across the screen. Ethan stood motionless, lips parted like he was about to say something. But nothing came out. B didn't even look at him. She stared at the TV, at the messages she thought were private, watching her own words boomerang back at her. I didn't blink. Every message, every photo, every sultry voice note played like a symphony of delusion. The room had turned into a theater, and I was both director and star. People looked from the screen to Ethan, then to me. My mother-in-law's hand slowly dropped her fork. His sister turned away. The shame in the air was thick enough to chew. But I just sipped my wine, letting it all unfold exactly as I'd planned it. Then, right as one of the more intimate recordings began to play, the one where she giggles and calls him my secret husband, I stood. I turned to Ethan, who still hadn't moved, and said clearly, "Surprise! I've been you for the past 2 weeks, and she's not the only one who fell for it." That broke the silence. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name. But I didn't flinch. This wasn't about drama. This was about truth. Ethan finally opened his mouth, but what came out wasn't an apology. It was denial. "This isn't what it looks like," he said. The most predictable line from the most predictable man. I almost laughed. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "And it sounds even worse if you'd care to hear the rest." He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore, and in a way, he didn't. I wasn't the woman he thought he could lie to forever. B turned to him, eyes wide, trembling. "You told me she didn't suspect anything," she whispered. He didn't answer. Couldn't. His lies had finally outrun him. She looked at me then, not angry, not smug, just broken. But I didn't feel sorry. She wasn't innocent. She had texted me, thinking she was texting him, with full knowledge he was married. She chose to play her part, and now she was on stage with me too. No one touched their food. The candles flickered, casting shadows across a table set for celebration, now drenched in humiliation. The TV kept rolling, message after message. I let it go for another minute before I walked over and pressed pause. The screen froze on a photo of them in a hotel mirror, her kissing his cheek. He looked so proud. I turned to the guests, all silent, all watching. "Dinner is officially canceled," I said. "But the show? That's just getting started." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply gathered the remote, turned off the screen, and looked Ethan straight in the eye. "You built this lie piece by piece," I said. "I just decided how it would collapse." He reached for me, muttering something, maybe a plea, maybe an excuse. I stepped back. That distance between us felt better than any hug he'd given me in years. He knew it was over. And this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. The guests began quietly standing, unsure of what to say, where to look. No one touched their glasses. No one offered comfort, not to him, and certainly not to her. B slipped out first, clutching her purse like it held her dignity. Ethan just stood there, pale and cornered, and I let him. I wanted him to sit in the stillness, in the truth, in the fallout. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to be exposed. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, I stayed by the window for a moment, watching taillights fade. The house was silent again, but not heavy, not suffocating. It felt clean, like something had been purged. I poured myself one last glass of wine and sat in the chair he always used. No one had an appetite anymore, except for justice. And I wasn't finished feeding it yet. The next morning, I didn't wait for him to explain. I didn't want to hear it. The apologies, the gaslighting, the rehearsed regret. I handed him a manila envelope. Inside, printed transcripts, time-stamped messages, a copy of our marriage license, and divorce papers already signed on my end. "You have everything you need," I told him, "and so do I." He stared at the papers like they might bite. I hoped they did. I changed the locks before lunch. Called a lawyer, called a locksmith, called a therapist. Everything I used to beg him to do, I did in a day. He stood on the porch like a ghost, texting me from the only phone he had left. "We can fix this," he wrote. "I love you." I didn't reply. He hadn't loved me in years. He just didn't expect me to stop loving him first. That's what scared him most. By the time the sun set, my house felt new. The air was different, sharper, lighter, like something had been scrubbed clean. I sat at the kitchen table alone, not sad, not angry, just still. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting, not for an explanation, not for a change, and especially not for him to come home. He didn't live here anymore. And honestly, neither did the woman who used to put up with him. I didn't plan to share it publicly. At first, it was just something I did for me, for closure, for clarity, for proof. But the story practically told itself. I uploaded screenshots, a few clips, and a summary under the title, "The Wife Who Replied from the Second Phone." Within hours, it took off. Comments poured in from women who saw themselves in my silence, my patience, my final strike. I wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. The messages came from everywhere. Strangers thanking me for showing them that quiet doesn't mean weak, that dignity can be loud without ever raising your voice. Some asked if I'd ever forgive him. Others wanted step-by-step details, but most just said, "Thank you." It was surreal, watching something so personal become so public. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the narrative, turning pain into purpose. So I started a podcast. Nothing fancy, just my voice, a microphone, and everything I wish someone had told me sooner. The first episode was called, "When His Other Phone Rings, Answer It." I told the whole story. Every shift in my gut, every message I typed pretending to be him, every lie I turned into leverage. It wasn't for sympathy. It was for women like me who'd been taught to endure in silence. Not anymore. People started sharing their stories. One woman wrote, "You gave me the courage to check my husband's second phone. I found everything." Another said, "You didn't just expose a cheater. You reminded me I'm allowed to walk away." I read every message, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a smile. I never wanted to be a symbol, but somehow I became one. Not of betrayal, but of resilience. Of the kind of strength that rises quietly, then roars. Ethan tried to reach out again. A letter, a voicemail, even a delivery. A bouquet of white lilies with a note that said, "I made a mistake." I didn't need to reply. My silence was louder than anything he'd ever said to me. I left the flowers outside, unopened. I wasn't angry anymore. I just wasn't available. He wanted to rewrite the ending, but I'd already published it. And it was perfect the way it was. He tried to live a double life. He thought he was clever, invincible, untouchable. But I gave him one unforgettable ending. Not just for him, but for every woman who's ever questioned her worth in someone else's story. Mine didn't end with begging or bitterness. It ended with truth, on my terms. And finally, with both phones silent, I could hear myself again.